Yep. Give me a nod when you're ready.
Like
Shooter's ready. Stand by.
Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of Bullets and Bourbon. I'm Frank Gao. I am not joined by Matt tonight. He is very busy at the moment. But my special guest is Brandon Alvarez. I met him when I was competing out in Lejeune. He was stationed in the Bragg area. Very good shooter. He is a grandmaster in carry optics, open and limited optics in USPSA. He was serving in Bragg at the time. He was part of Ranger Regiment. He previously served in Savannah, Georgia, and then he was at Bragg for a bit. Recently got out and started his own training company. So that's really what we're here to talk about, is the competition and the training side of things. But Brandon, happy to have you on, man.
Hi, glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, hell yeah. But let's start with the military background, because I skimmed over it a little bit. Why did you initially join? And then can you just walk us through your chronological history a bit?
So I'm an idiot, and I turned down a full ride to Yale to go jump out of airplanes. Thought that would be cool, and then looking back, that probably was not the ideal choice, but is what it is. I don't regret it. So I got bored in school. I was academically inclined, but it just was not appealing to me. I was tired of that and didn't want to do like the whole post-secondary education route. So enlisted, did the airborne contract coming in, picked up a Ranger contract in basic. That was 2014. Went straight to 175 in Savannah. Spent 9 years active duty, the majority of that in Ranger Regiment, and then my last few years over at Bragg in the 82nd. And then got out last year, went National Guard, and now I'm just trying to learn how to integrate with that. It's a pretty big culture shock.
Yeah, learn how to reservist and learn how to civilian. So you were at Yale and you decided to enlist.
No. I got my acceptance letter, and then I backed out and went straight to the Army.
Yeah, that's insane, man. What would you have gone there for? Was it an athletic scholarship or was it purely academic?
Scholarship for mechanical engineering. Yeah.
Okay. Damn.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I'm guessing your ASVAB score was like a 99.
It was up there. It was a 90 something.
Okay. And then they told you could do whatever the hell you wanted, and you told them you wanted to be a grunt anyway, yeah?
And the recruiter was a little upset by that because I'm sure they have quotas for
They have quotas for any of the high technical threshold MOSs that they're trying to fill. That's funny. I mean, I still ended up going to college, but it was a choice between enlisting out of high school. I had a half ride scholarship, not to a place as nice as Yale. But my Chinese immigrant parents would have killed me if I enlisted instead of went to school. That's really interesting, man. So, okay, so you have a very high mechanical aptitude, is what I'm getting from this. Like the stuff on the STEM side comes really easily to you.
Maybe at one point, I'm sure the Army killed some brain cells, but
Yeah, as it does. I don't know. Did you ever do anything during your time in the Army that really felt like I guess took full advantage of your like technical thinking capacities?
So ironically enough, soon after I got out, I got a slot through the Guard to go to Pathfinder school.
Okay.
And I've always said there's no legitimately difficult school in the Army. It's just something you suck it up and do.
Right.
Until I went to Pathfinder, and I was actually pretty surprised how academically challenging it was. Nothing was inherently difficult in and of itself. It was just the amount of information you have to intake in such a short time period was pretty damn difficult. I was surprised.
I'm not familiar with that school, but just going off the name, is it land navigation or something else?
It's a weird combination of air traffic control, air assault, loads, and then like jump master activities.
Okay.
It's a very ambiguous task,
right?
With a lot of different components to it, but it's pretty academically difficult. At least for the degree course that it is, there's a lot of information packed in there. So But aside from that, man, like nothing in the army's been really difficult academically or anything. It's
Yeah.
just as you go through the motions.
Right, but that's not what you're looking for something that was it was difficult. I mean, that's the reason. I still ended up enlisting after a year of college because I was like, I felt, I mean, maybe somewhat intellectually stimulated, but I feel like when you're young, sometimes there's something else you're looking for, and it sounds like that's why you went to the army. Yeah,
Yeah, 100%. Just had to
like
change the pace. Being behind a desk just wasn't cutting it.
yeah, yeah, and you definitely would have been as a mechanical engineering major. You would have been handcuffed to a desk. Okay, that's really interesting. I didn't know that about you. What? So, I mean, you serve all this time, doing very well in the army. What influenced your decision to eventually get out of the service?
So I had my daughter in December of 21, and my end of my contract was January of 23. So it was essentially a year after her birth that I had the option to get out. So it was kind of that make or break where I was right at that halfway point to retirement, and it was either stick it out for 20 or do what's right on on behalf of my daughter and get out and
Yeah.
spend her because I was gone a lot when I was active. So
Okay.
it would have been, you know,
Yeah.
I don't say, her growing up without a father, but I'd be gone quite a bit during her childhood. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And that's an important thing to prioritize. And I guess on the officer side, right? After a transition to the officer side, it's always surprised me how many conversations I've had to have with senior enlisted and be like, dude, you're gonna put away the uniform one day, but
yep.
your kids and your wife are still gonna be there. So you want them to recognize you. So I think you made the right decision, man.
Yeah. I don't regret it. Not one bit. Loving spending time with the kids and it's been a good time.
Yeah, kids plural. You had another one?
Kid one and
Kid
then
one.
two fur babies.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah, that's a full house, man.
Yeah.
So looking back, and we talk about this often, people getting out, it never goes seamlessly, right? The armed services are part of they comprise your entire adult life, and then you decide to, take the cape off and go to something else. Looking back, what do you wish you had known or done differently prior to getting out?
So just I think networking while you're still active is probably the biggest thing I would tell people getting out. I kind of got caught up in the whole, PCS portion of it. Like, are we going to do a Diddy move? Are we going to have the military move us? And I was caught up in these little, relatively unimportant tasks.
Right.
I should have been networking and finding, people that were going to support my transition out into a new career field. So I was kind of in a mad scramble at the last minute there, trying to find
Yeah.
a gig work. I had, enough money in the bank account to pad me for a little while, but I didn't want to
Yeah.
procrastinate on getting a job. So
Gotcha. I always tell them like I think there's two sides of it, right? One side of it is that you have the Marine who's like 1 year out, he's like, oh, I'm getting out, and then decides to like basically be a non-element for an entire year. But then you get the ones who are used to being busy, and usually they're at the friction point of their units, and they don't take time for themselves until it's too late. Would you say that you fell into that latter category?
yeah, 100%. I should have learned to tell the command team no, but I tried to,
Yeah.
you know, I fell into the guilt trip. They're like, oh, well, we need platoon sergeants for these training events and this and that. And
Yeah.
I let them get me. And I was scrambling at the last minute because I was at these stupid training events that didn't matter.
Right. That they really could have found anybody else to do those as well, right?
Absolutely. They could have
It's
backfilled everybody, but
right. But if you're that's the unfortunate thing about the about either the army and the Marines. If you're good at your job, they're just gonna give you more work.
yep. And they
Yeah.
will use you until your last day.
Yeah. Absolutely. And they don't care what happens to you afterwards because you stop existing, you take off the uniform and you go do other things. So okay. I mean, I think unfortunately it seems like people more or less learn the same hard lessons every time they get out. But yeah, just if you're listening, just be mindful of that. So when we first met, myself, Sam Nelson, blown away by like your ability to shoot, man. I think your eye speed, trigger finger, and your movement were like clearly at the GM level. Do those aspects of practical shooting come naturally to you?
I would say that the speed aspect comes fairly naturally. My problem was throttling down, was control. I would drop a fair amount of Charlies, and at locals it didn't really matter because if you're fast enough, you can drop a lot of Charlies and win.
Yes.
And I would start going to majors and realizing that competing against super squad guys, that just wasn't going to cut it.
Right.
So I had to teach myself to really throttle back and be able to create that quote unquote match pace, because trying to execute in a match like I was in practice, it took me so far, and then I kind of plateaued. So
Okay.
had to find a happy medium.
Yeah. So your issue was really with visual patience, right, or visual discipline.
Hundred
How,
percent.
how did you isolate and address that?
So a lot of it was giving myself standards for a task or drill in practice before shooting it. So like, hey, I can only drop two Charlies for this iteration,
Mhm.
and assigning yourself those, no matter how arbitrary it is, those point standards
Yeah.
and or time standards, depending on what you're working towards, really makes a difference towards the intent of the drill. If you just set up, a 5 target array and say go for it, there's really no deliberate intent behind it.
Right.
It's just I'm gonna go as fast as I can and see what happens. Assigning yourself, a no fail task like no Charlies or 2 Charlies or what have you, really makes a difference in the outcome. So
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Very cool. I see you training a lot on your on social media. What is the balance of dry fire versus live fire training for you?
it's mostly dry lately. Being with having a toddler in the house and being in the garden and stuff,
Yeah.
a lot of my weekends are taken up. So it's, I'd say 80% dry fire to 20% live fire right now.
Okay. Gotcha. Um, yeah, that totally makes sense. I think if I had to prioritize one thing, it'd be dry fire over everything else. Like if I could just have access to the guns and feel the gun in my hand once a day, I think that's the most important thing. Um, so I think part of my path to finally, getting the GM card was the ability to critique and assess my own performance internally, right? I think sometimes when we're starting out, you see it with new shooters, they'll turn around and be like, "Oh, how was that?" And I think my initial reaction is like, "You should know how it was. You're the one who was doing it, right?" But that level of awareness and that, I guess, that out like the focus, the ability to make certain things subconscious and just focus on shot calling or wherever else it is, your stage plan, that comes over time. So after your practice, after your matches, how are you analyzing your performance?
So I try to take phone notes in between stages, especially after poor stages, on what exactly went wrong and what I think my path forward is to correct those deficiencies, because it's really really easy at the end of a match, even if you had two really bad stages. If you win the match, it's easy to forget
Right.
those poor moments. So as soon as it happens after the stage, I try to take notes on my phone. That way I can address it later and remember exactly what I was feeling in that moment, as opposed to kind of getting that false sense of security by just winning, even if it's at the expense of a poor performance.
Mhm.
So
Okay. Now, a lot of people are starting to use first person cameras, to record their shooting, which looks really cool, but is also possibly another diagnostic tool. Are you using video at all? Like, are you watching over video, and do you do the whole first person thing?
absolutely, yeah. I have one of those little what are they, the Instago
Yeah,
cameras.
everyone has them. Yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah,
fantastic, and yeah, it's a great diagnostic. It Watching third person is great for seeing like footwork deficiencies and
yeah.
entry and exit deficiencies, but that first person, you can physically see like those decision points you're making in the match, like, hey, I
Mhm.
overshot the position, and it's extremely clear in first person. Or I decided to take a makeup at this target, and I can see that decision point in real time. So I think first person diagnostics are invaluable, and I'm so glad that those little cameras have come where they have, because I
Yeah.
tried those little GoPro heroes back in the day, but they
Too
bounced.
bulky.
And yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, there's those. The aim cam, I think, has some people adopt that. I think it gets closer in line with the dot, which I don't think is really that important. But yeah, that kind of mounts onto your glasses. But yeah, the Instago has kind of been the gold standard. It seems to be what everyone's using, and is affordable and very readily available. You talked about writing down notes in between stages. Do you do you try to balance that? Like, are you just exceptionally harsh on yourself, or is there like at least a part of that where you're like, we still got to end on a high note because we still have to, I guess protect our self-image going into the rest of these stages.
That's the mindset I should have. I struggle with dwelling on those low points. I'm usually pretty good about dumping that mentality during my next make ready,
Yeah.
but I carry it over at least and to the next stage.
Yeah.
Uh, I definitely need to work on that whole mental management aspect and
Okay.
not being so self-critical
Yeah.
immediately for the stage. So
So you mentioned you said the words mental management. Have you taken Steve Anderson's class or have you subscribed to any of his methods?
I've not taken this class. I've definitely looked into some of his, between him and Jay Beal and the other guys that kind of preach the mental management side of things. Definitely leaned into that side of it. Certainly not an SME in that by any means, and clearly I need more work on it. But
Yeah.
now definitely going to start incorporating that though, because I think that is whether it's Steve Anderson's style of mental management, quote unquote, or just
Yeah.
some sort of mechanism to control that energy level going to the next stage.
Mhm.
That's kind of what separates, just being a GM from being in contention to win.
Right. Yeah.
You know,
Because yes.
nat-
Yeah. It's consistency, right?
exactly.
Like your ability to shoot at that threshold for the entire match. Yeah. So I was like you, like that. I would be exceptionally harsh on myself, and it's the remnant of several things, right? I am the child of immigrants. I am the child of immigrants who wanted to be a lawyer or a doctor. I'm a Marine Corps officer instead, right? Um, you
All
know,
right.
yeah, yeah, it's all worked out. But I think that very like direct and blunt way of criticizing is definitely taken over like my internal voice. But when I talked to Steve Anderson, he said like, critique yourself, absolutely. But honestly, like the thing that he said to me that was interesting and what I've been trying is that after a bad stage run or something that wasn't, perfect, your last visualize it like it went perfectly. And then, you take those vibes with you to the next stage. And that's been an interesting way of trying to like leave a bad performance behind, even though I know in my heart of hearts that it wasn't a good stage.
No, I like that. I haven't heard that before, but
Yeah.
might be incorporating that in the next match.
Yeah. I literally step away. I'm just like, I fucking killed it. I'm going to kill this next one.
Hell yeah.
So yeah, man. I mean, really, it's just Jedi mind tricking yourself. But if it gets results, then fuck it,
Heck,
right?
yeah. If it's
Yeah.
stupid, but it's not stupid.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So we talked a little bit. You talked about how shooting bad points at locals doesn't really work at majors. Do you approach those matches differently at all?
Not. I don't inherently go into majors with a different mindset. I do use some locals as practice, which I definitely wouldn't try at a level 2 or above. Um, I kind of go into a local with the intent to either practice or to gauge execution, one of the two, but never
Yep.
both at the same time.
Yep.
Uh, if I'm, trying to work on throttling aggression levels on stages, I'll go into a match with that intent, knowing that the match might go poorly, but I'm getting the training value out of it.
Right.
Whereas if I'm going to a local, maybe my last local before a major, I'm going to go with the exact same mindset I would take into that major and just try to gauge my current level of execution, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So you're training people now. What would you say to people who just show up to the match and be like, "Oh, this is my practice"?
Yeah, see, I think for the vast majority of shooters, especially, you know, really like A class and below, you're probably not getting quote unquote practice at your locals.
No.
Um, it's certainly not a practice of hard skills. And if hard skills are what you're trying to get better at, then you need to go do live fire. Um, that said, I think if you're, in that MGM range, it can be a form of practice. I wouldn't use it exclusively as practice, but it's a good way to practice that
Yeah.
flying aggression levels, activator sequences, movement techniques, things like that that
Yeah.
aren't really feasible to set up in your own training because it would take forever to set up 8 different stages.
Right. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's prohibitively. It's not cost effective. But yeah, I agree with you. I think when I started using locals as a way to test a new visual pace or just like aggressive movement, that's when like because initially, you're like hitting deltas and like things are but eventually you stabilize and you're like, okay, I can actually understand the stage at the speed. And then it
Ex-
just becomes that visual fidelity of like nailing down the alphas and fine tuning the small things. But you can't really get there if you just show up to the local and just every single time it's like, oh, it's the test and I have to be conservative and I can't have to avoid making mistakes. So I'm with you. Yeah, it's kind of refreshing to see that we see things kind of the same way. Um,
Absolutely.
so is there a difference in the way that you look at your results from, well, I mean, I feel like you've already touched on this. Um, yes, like what is your goal at a major match most of the time?
Well, aside from winning,
Yeah,
so really it depends on who's going. To be honest, like there's some majors where you go in, with the understanding you're probably going to win. Sorry, hear the dogs in the background.
that's all good.
Um, Whereas, some majors you're going to get the super spotters in your division, and it's like, okay, I want to stack up.
Yeah,
Obviously, it only applies to that day at that match at that time, but it's still a decent reference on kind of where you're at in relation to the best in the country.
right.
So I'm not necessarily expecting to win, but I still go in with the mindset that I'm trying to win.
Yeah,
Make
yeah,
sure I'm not throttling down execution to match expectations. If that makes sense.
yeah. Yeah, it's a difference between expecting to dominate and expecting to just try to keep pace the best you can,
Exactly.
or really to survive. Yeah, that I mean that's nationals, right? You go to nationals, and if you're shooting against Eric Raffel, and you can't you can't tell yourself you're going to be the champion.
So it's probably not going to play out.
No, no, probably not. Definitely not. Okay. Now that you've started training people, I'm curious. So like with different, I guess, classifications, right? Going from C class on, and we don't necessarily have to tie it to class, but I'm interested in some of the technical and mental barriers that you see your students or just other shooters in general experiencing that you think are the biggest obstacles to them getting to that next level.
Yeah, for sure. So I think kind of from that, C class to B class range, it's more hard skills based. It's just learning to execute those fundamental tasks consistently.
Yeah.
Your calls, your reloads, and shooting the points adequately fast.
Right.
Obviously, like in B class, you can kind of get there one of two ways. You can either shoot 4 points quickly, or you can shoot really accurately, somewhat slow, and it's
Yeah.
still going to get you the same classification goal.
Yep.
From B to A, you kind of have to refine that level of consistency. You have to be reasonably fast with reasonable points, and I think that's kind of a barrier for a lot of people breaking out of B class. Um, I'd say the majority, like over 60% of my students, are kind of in that B class going to A class range and trying to break out because they're kind of plateaued right there.
Okay.
Um, so I think statistically, that's probably the hardest class to break out of, at least from my sample size.
Yeah. Yeah.
A class to M class, it's not so much hard skills anymore. Your high A's can do pretty much everything hard skills wise that a grandmaster can do. It's just executing it at a consistent level,
Yeah.
especially with that match pressure. A lot of the times, trying to get from A to M, people go for that whole hero or zero method. I did the same thing, and that typically does not pan out. So
No.
you have to learn to shoot, whether you're trying to make it through classifiers or majors or whatever. You have to learn to shoot those important stages, quote unquote, the same way you would shoot any other stage, and just understand that your results are going to be fairly consistent with your current skill level, and not trying to make things happen that are outside of your current skill level. Because I think that's what we all try to do, right? Like
Yeah.
we're A class and we're like, oh, I'm going to hook up and throw this
Right.
GM.
I'm going to the plate, hitting a grand slam every single time. Yep.
Like, yeah, you can probably hook up once or twice in practice, and then you fool yourself into believing that
Yeah.
you're capable of that consistently. But it's an oddball event. It's not something you should expect of your performance
Yeah.
consistently. So just getting past that kind of mental barrier for A to M, and then M to GM. Performance wise at matches, you see a lot of very, very good M's that probably should be GMs.
So sometimes it's really indistinguishable, right? Like I don't think there's really a shame in getting beat by M class. Some of these guys just don't shoot locals.
Exactly. And it's either the lack of classifiers that hold them back. Some of them might sandbag a little bit. They might intentionally try to stay in M class to
Yeah.
get high, whatever. But for the most part, I think a lot of it's just they a lot of these guys only shoot majors now. It seems like some of these guys I see on Instagram, you don't see local match footage from them. You see
Yeah.
just majors, so they don't really have the opportunity to bump classifications unless they place.
Unless they win and in order to match bump, you
Exactly,
basically have to outright win against 3 GMs. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So I think at that MGM level, if you're in that mid to high M level, you're probably in the mix with most of the GMs. It's just a matter of when are you going to get
Yeah.
the classification.
Yeah.
But and then as far as once you make GM, I think people think you've kind of arrived, but realistically, there's a larger disparity
Yeah.
between
There
your super
is.
spotters and your
Yeah.
GMs versus like a GM and an A class guy.
Hmm.
So I think people have this misconception that once you've made GM, you're in contention all of a sudden, but that's not the case. Like
Yeah.
we have huge range of skill levels in this grandmaster kind of category. So
Yeah. Well, I think there's also a mentality that once you achieve it, it's like there's nothing that's really all people really wanted was the title to begin with.
yeah,
And I think, there's probably some acknowledgement that in order to be the best, it's just going to be so taxing on your time and your money and your energy. And I think a lot of people look at that and they're just like, I I'm good with where I'm at. Um, you
I,
said something that I just want to tease out. Do you feel like the classifiers are pretty accurately or a pretty accurate gauge of skill level?
yeah, for the most part. Obviously, the new 24 series has been a pretty
Uh,
hot topic. Really, those are pretty ridiculous.
I haven't shot any of them yet.
I haven't shot them either, but the ones I've seen do look pretty insane. I saw
Yeah.
Sean Griffin shoot some recently, and he threw like an 80% on one, and it was blazing. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think those can use some tweaking. With with the exception of the 24 series classifiers, I think it's a fairly accurate representation. Obviously, some are more shot out than others.
Yeah.
It might be a little higher hit factors, but at the end of the day, like it's gonna put you in the ballpark of what your skill level is. And I think we see that at matches. Typically, the match results are right around where their classifications fall, with
Usually,
the
yeah.
outliers. So
Yeah.
obviously, it can't be as broken as some people make it out to be. But
Yeah. No, I agree. I think right, like that don't worry about the system. This is no system designed to gauge human proficiency is perfect.
exactly,
Like there's literally name one. There isn't one, right?
no way to quantify something so
Yeah.
inconsistent,
Right.
subjective, and
Yeah. Like people are gonna bitch about Madden ratings for football players. They're gonna, like the metrics we use to gauge a service member, right? Like the fitness scores. Like, does that tell the entire story? It definitely doesn't. Like the scores on marksmanship tests. Yeah. So I think that's besides the point. And I think on my way to finally getting the GM card, I realized I'm like, it's just another fucking stage.
exactly.
Just go out there and just burn it down. And if you deserve to be a GM, you'll be a GM.
And typically, as soon as you stop caring about classifiers, that's when you start
Yes.
shooting good class.
Yes. Yeah, it was crazy because I was the match director at Quantico, right, for the last year, and we run Saturday, Sunday, and that gives me the ability. I don't do reshoots, but I will shoot the same division between Saturday and Sunday just because sometimes I like to see, if I can do something a little differently. And I shot a really conservative, like a shutout classifier. I can't remember which one it was, but it was like an 85%. I was just like, okay, I can shoot that faster. It's gonna feel awkward. It's gonna feel like pretty scary, but let's see what happens. And I shot it more aggressively, but with a lot of focus, and it was my first GM classifier. And that's really it. I think it's partly mindset. I think people either convince themselves that they need to knock it out of their park, or they convince themselves that there's something to lose with it, and you can't go into a stage like that. You just have to focus on the process.
100%, and
Yeah.
that's the thing right there. Exactly what you just said. Excuse me. Is people get so outcome focused that they
Yeah.
totally lose track of just shooting their sights.
Yeah.
And like I said, if you just stay process focused, it'll happen. If your skill level is there or close to there, you're going to see it in the results. But people get caught up and they try to throw that
Yeah.
swing for the fences and it never pans out.
Yeah. No, absolutely. No, it's definitely a big tenet of mental management. But I want to talk about your training company, dude. So talk to me about Project Broken Arrow. Where did that name come from?
So broken arrow in the military is a fires term when you fire on your own position because shit's gone to hell.
Yeah.
So that's just kind of a running joke. It's like, hey, shit's fucked, broken arrow.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So it was just like a phrase that was recurring in my career, jokingly and in theater. So we just kind of ran with it. It seemed, you
Yeah.
know, not
Okay.
fitting necessarily, but it seemed like it fit for the market.
Yeah, 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 for sure. Would you say that you're primarily focused on military clients?
Nope. So I do military and law enforcement classes primarily. I'm focused on open enrollment classes. Most of my open enrollment stuff is competitors that want to get better. So, but we have everybody from local law enforcement to everyday carriers that just want to get more proficient. And I do host some agency specific classes. That was kind of what took up most of my time last year.
Okay.
So I didn't get to do a ton of open enrollment classes like I was planning on coming into this full time.
Yeah.
But this year I'm trying to kind of revamp and really hit the open enrollment stuff hard. So
Okay. Very cool. It sounds like you do a lot of classes. Do you do any one-on-one coaching?
so I just recently opened up an option for virtual coaching for
Okay.
one-on-one coaching and half
Yeah.
hour sessions. I have done a couple one-on-ones here and there, but it's never something I publicly offered. There's people that reached out and
Mhm.
just happened to have land and time and money.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, I think the virtual coaching thing is kind of a happy medium where it doesn't it's not so out of reach financially for people because one-on-one classes are expensive compared to open enrollment,
Right.
especially if I have to travel to get there. But the virtual stuff, it's cheap. It's You can kind of scale it to your desires. If you buy 30-minute or hour increments, you can get as much or as little feedback as you want. And if you
Mhm.
decide on the road, I've kind of reached those short-term goals and I want to expand on that, I'll buy another hour. So I think that's kind of I wouldn't say an untapped market because other people are definitely doing it, but
Yeah. Yeah.
a relatively new market that's pretty it's lucrative for instructors and it's convenient for students. So I think it's going to be the next big thing, to be honest.
Yeah, no, I think that approach makes a lot of sense. And there's a lot you can do over an online forum, right? You can dry fire together, you can go over someone's match videos. Yeah, so many things that you can do. All right, so you have you're kind of a rare breed, man, because I feel like a lot of military instructors, they aren't willing to subject themselves to competition the same way you are. They especially don't have GM cards in three different divisions. So what do you feel sets you apart from other training companies?
So I think having that kind of dual perspective from the competitor side and the special operations side
Yeah,
kind of lets me provide those nuanced takes to students on when something's applicable, when it's not.
yeah,
Especially in like my agency and military classes, there's they get, as like they get hyper focused on the combat application of things, quote unquote, and these ridiculous accuracy standards where they never push past their comfort zone
right.
wise. So being able to provide that perspective for them that, hey, this is how you train to get better, and then you can apply the tactics, SOPs, and TTPs as necessary to your shooting based on your application or discipline or whatever, kind of gives them a little bit of ease of mind as opposed to when they bring in
Yeah,
civilian competitors to teach them or whatever, and then
yeah.
like, okay, the guy can shoot, but
Yeah, he
nope.
doesn't he didn't grow up in the same environments that we did. And yeah, there is that line. I guess have you had any success in all your agency training in getting some of those students to venture over to the competition side?
Yeah, definitely. The military classes specifically have been fairly successful. Those guys.
Oh yeah.
So one thing I did when I was a platoon sergeant at Bragg was offer to pay for my guys' first match fee, essentially
I
to
do the
show up.
same thing.
Yeah,
Yeah. I actually I offer ammo too sometimes, which
there you go.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That really
Like,
gets people
when
out.
you offer to pay for everything, half the guys still don't show up. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
but
Absolutely.
offering that got a fair amount of people from my platoon to come out and kind
Yeah.
of dip their toes in the water. Some of them stayed, and some of them got their egos hurt and never came back. But even if you only get, 4 dudes that stick to it, that's 4 more than would have
Yeah.
otherwise got involved. So I started kind of pitching to the leadership and the class hosts at these agency classes to offer the same kind of incentives,
Yeah.
and seems to have gone pretty well. A lot of those guys hit me up and say they've gotten involved in USPSA or IDPA, one of the two,
Nice.
and kind of asked for advice going into the sport. So seems to be like seems to be it's going pretty well.
Yeah. No, that's really cool. That's really interesting that's the whole reason we ran into each other when we shot matches in North Carolina. It
Yeah,
was because
definitely.
me and Sammy Nelson were essentially doing the same thing with Marines from Lejeune. So it's good. Somebody needs to be the practical shooting Jehovah's Witness, right?
Definitely.
Somebody needs to spread the good gospel. So yeah, all about it, dude. That's awesome. Okay, so I mean, you're all in on your training company. How do you balance the effort you put into developing others while still taking time to develop yourself as a competitor and as an instructor?
I'll let you know when I figure it out. I have
Yeah,
not done a good job at that. This I'd say the past year and a half, I've heavily neglected my own shooting
yeah,
to get the company up and running at the scale I wanted, and two, following up with students on this virtual stuff, or just once students take in person classes rather. I don't in the class there. If they hit me up offline after the class, I'm more than willing to discuss whatever they want to discuss and help them continue their progression.
yeah.
But that does become time consuming as that clientele builds up.
It
So
does. Yeah,
I've definitely neglected my personal progression for the instructing side the past year. But now that we're full time and there's no day job to get in the way, I'm hoping to kind of learn to balance that work life relationship a little better again,
yeah,
and get back into it. So I got Area 6 in a couple weeks, going in very unpracticed, and then we'll see how that goes, and that'll kind of be my gauge on my
yeah.
progression forward.
Yeah, yeah, very cool, dude. No, it's good that you're still getting time to go shoot matches. What I've seen from folks who go full-time instructor, a good example up here is David Wampler, who recently went full-time with his company, and just he still shoots really well at matches, but it hasn't been the same level of dominance that we've seen from him, just because he's putting so much energy into other people, right? Um, part of being a competitor is being a little bit selfish, but you're helping so many others becoming a better version of themselves. So it just makes sense. Um, where do you want? So you talked about like going full time, but where do you want Broken Arrow to like? What's your vision for like the next 5 years?
So ideally, we're going to secure some land here. Hopefully next year. We've been looking. South Florida's ridiculously priced, so
Yeah,
we are waiting to get adequate land all in one buy. I'm not trying to buy adjacent lots down the road and
yeah,
hope that it developed in the meantime. So we're just going to save up, get 40 plus acres at one time, be able to develop an actual training complex and range out there.
yeah,
Host the law enforcement military cats, because I think adequate training facilities for those guys are lacking and few and
yeah,
far between. Um, Obviously on Bragg we have plenty, but like
yeah,
all our smaller installations and all these National Guard outposts and stuff, they don't have the
yeah,
facilities to do adequate training. So I'm trying to build something comparable to what we have active duty to provide those guys. And on the flip side of that, I'm trying to expand the open enrollment classes to where I'm teaching at least one class a month,
yeah,
whether it's nationwide, so it shouldn't be too difficult to fill that schedule. But yeah, one class a month for open enrollment, and then agency classes wherever they get the time. And
yeah.
hopefully, uh, hopefully next year is kind of our breakthrough year. We can secure that land and start building. Hopefully, mid 2026, Q1, Q2 2026 will be fully developed, up and running, shoot houses built and whatnot. So
Very cool.
might be a little
Uh,
off, but we'll see.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that's super cool, man. I feel like that's every single one of us. That's that's what we want to do when we get out. And then it's awesome. It's awesome that you're making it happen. You keep saying we. Who are you working with?
So we, as in me and my wife, because she's been
Okay.
my manager out here. She's
Okay.
me look for you know reasonably priced land that's adequate
Yeah.
acreage, and
Okay.
she all my scheduling and stuff. So she's kind of been my supporter in all this.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Like that, you know, that you have your wife in support of the things that you're passionate about, and that you guys are working towards them together is great. Okay, so if somebody does want to reach out to you and schedule a class, what's the best way to get a hold of you? And you will travel anywhere, CONUS, I'm guessing.
Yep. Anywhere CONUS or Oconus if it's Hawaii or Alaska.
Yeah,
Um, not doing anything international just yet. We'll see. We'll cross that bridge when we get there.
yeah.
But training at projectbrokenarrow.com is my email. They can go to projectbrokenarrow.com and find all the contact information there. Or if you reach out on social media, I return messages as soon as I see them. Sometimes they get buried in the inbox, but I'll get to them at some point.
Okay.
So on Facebook, I'm just Brandon Alvarez, and on Instagram, I am Brandon_Alvarez 1102.
Mhm.
And yeah, no, I'll get back to messages as I see them. The emails are the fastest way, though. I'll respond to those within 24 hours. So
Okay. Yeah, very cool, man. Uh, that sums up all the questions I had for you. Is there anything else you'd like to leave the audience with?
no, that's about it, man. I think we covered it. I appreciate you having me on. It's good to see
Yeah,
you again.
yeah, and dude, I as soon as I found out that you're off doing your own thing, I definitely wanted to bring you on. But yeah, hey, if you so you're based out of the South Florida area primarily, yeah?
Yes, yeah, I'm in Vero Beach, so
Okay,
Central South.
okay. Well, if you are listening from that area and you want to get training, Brandon is an amazing shooter and an amazing instructor as well. If you live somewhere else in the United States, reach out to him. Definitely make something happen. I wish you the best of luck, man. It's awesome what you're doing. I hope you have amazing success in the future. To our listeners, let us know how we're doing. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we'll see you in the next one.
Appreciate it, man. Have a good one.